Okay, the section that we're in here in the book of Exodus is from chapter 7, verse 8 through to chapter 10 and verse 29, in which we have the record of the nine plagues that God brought upon Egypt, and then the 10th plague being the death of the firstborn. We noted last week how the plagues are arranged in a particular order, in sort of in three groups of three. That the first plague in each of the three groups begins with Moses and Aaron going to Pharaoh early in the morning, when Pharaoh is going down to the water, to the river, and them speaking to him there. The second plague in the group of three is when Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh again to warn him, and at some unspecified time during the day. And then the third plague in the group of three is an unannounced plague. There's no warning is given to Pharaoh. And we'll see that pattern again this evening when we look at the second group of the three plagues. So last week we looked at the first three plagues, which was turning the water into blood. We looked at the second plague, the plague of frogs, and then the third plague, which was the plague of gnats. And we saw how, with the first two there, Pharaoh's magicians were able, somehow using their secret arts, their magic arts, were able to duplicate the effects of those two plagues. But the third plague, the plague of gnats, they were unable to do that. And they concluded that this is the finger of God. They acknowledged God was the power behind that plague. We saw with the second plague, the plague of frogs, that Pharaoh uh, asked Moses and Aaron to entreat the Lord, that the Lord might take away the frogs. And then he promised that he would let the people go and sacrifice to the Lord. But once the frogs were taken away, then he went back on his word, and he did not allow them to go. And in each case, at the end of each of the plagues, we see Pharaoh's heart continues to be hardened against God and against the lessons that the plagues are teaching him. So this evening we come to the second group of three plagues, which begins in chapter 8, verse 20, and goes through to verse 12 of chapter 9. So the fourth plague, the first of this group of three, is in chapter 8, from verse 20 to verse 32, which is the plague of flies, and we'll read the account here. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Rise up early in the morning and wait for Pharaoh as he goes out to the water, and say to him, Thus says the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. Else, if you will not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies on you and your servants and your people, and into your houses, and the houses of the Egyptians shall be filled with swarms of flies, and also the ground on which they stand. But on that day I will set apart the land of Goshen, where my people dwell, so that no swarms of flies shall be there, that you may know that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. Thus I will put a division between my people and your people. By tomorrow shall this sign be." And the Lord did so. There came great swarms of flies into the house of Pharaoh and into his servants' houses, and in all the land of Egypt the land was ruined by reason of the flies. Then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, "Go, sacrifice to your God within the land." But Moses said, "It would not be right to do so, for we shall sacrifice to the Lord our God offerings abominable to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice offerings abominable to the Egyptians before their eyes, will they not stone us? We must go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he will command us." So Pharaoh said, "I will let you go to sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness, only you shall not go very far away. Make entreaty for me." Then Moses said, "Behold, I am going out from you, and I will pray to the Lord that the swarms of flies may depart from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people tomorrow. Only let not Pharaoh deal falsely again by not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord." So Moses went out from Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord. And the Lord did as Moses asked, and removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his servants and from his people. Not one remained. But Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also, and did not let the people go. So for the second time, then Moses is to meet with Pharaoh early in the morning as he goes out to the water. Again, this is the pattern that we follow with the plagues. We had that in chapter 7, verse 15, with the first plague, with Moses meeting Pharaoh early in the morning when he went out to the water. Pharaoh is warned here that if he will not let the people go, then the land of Egypt will be covered with swarms of flies. It may be that the flies were attracted by the piles of dead frogs which were there from the second plague. That would sort of be a natural follow on from that. The word flies is not actually in the Hebrew text. The announcement is that the land will be covered with swarms. So the swarms are not actually specified. The translators of the Septuagint version, the Greek version of the Hebrew text, used the word for dog fly, which is a fly which gives a very painful bite. So some kind of fly would sort of fit with the picture here. And the flies will be on the people, they will be in their houses, and they will cover the ground as well. And certain types of flies were considered to be manifestations of various gods of the Egyptians. So again, this is, as we saw with the frogs, it's an attack really upon the gods that are worshipped by the Egyptians. We have mention of this plague in Psalm 78, verse 45. We looked at this psalm last week in connection with the other plagues as well. Psalm 78, verse 45, which is recounting these events, that God sent among them swarms of flies which devoured them, and then mention of the frogs in the same verse there as well. And then Psalm 105 and verse 31 as well, another historical psalm recalling God's dealings with Israel here. Psalm 105 and verse 31, he spoke and there came swarms of flies and gnats throughout their country. The psalmist mentioning these things as well. However, God will make a distinction between the land of Egypt and the land of Goshen, where the Israelites live. And the Israelites had settled in the land of Goshen when they arrived there with Jacob. Joseph had encouraged them to settle in that part of the land. In Genesis chapter 45 and verse 10, we read of this here. Genesis 45, verse 10. Make haste and go up to my father and say to him, this is Joseph speaking here. Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, and your flocks and your herds and all that you have. So they were to settle in the land of Goshen. Then also Genesis 46, verse 28 makes mention of it as well. He sent Judah before him to Joseph to appear before him in Goshen, and they came into the land of Goshen. And then chapter 47, verse 1. So Joseph went in and told Pharaoh, my father and my brothers with their flocks and herds and all that they possess have come from the land of Canaan. They are now in the land of Goshen. So this was where they were settled. So with the plague of flies now, God makes a distinction between the land where the Egyptians are dwelling and the land of Goshen where the Israelites are. The Israelites will not be affected by this plague. And this shows really the miraculous nature of the plague. If it had been simply a natural occurrence, then the land of Goshen would have been affected as well, the whole land. But this distinction is made here. And in verse 23, the phrase there, I will put a division or a distinction between my people and your people, is literally a set redemption, that God will set redemption between the Egyptians and the Israelites. So an indication there that God making this distinction, this drawing this difference between the Egyptians and the Israelites, whom he is going to redeem out of the land. On the map here, we can see the location of Goshen there to the east, on the eastern side of the Nile Delta there. That's the land of Goshen where the Israelites are settled. So the plague is brought about by the Lord, and there came, we're told, great swarms of flies. Literally, it means heavy swarms of flies, heavy swarms. So the swarms were oppressive and burdensome. It's annoying just when there's one or two flies buzzing around, but to have great swarms of flies would really be quite oppressive. Must have been a massive number of flies here. And Pharaoh himself was not exempt from the flies. We're told that they came into his house too and into his servants' houses as well. And the effect of this, we're told in verse 24, was that in all the land of Egypt, the land was ruined by reason of the flies. This was the devastation that the flies brought to the land, just as the water turning to blood and the frogs causing devastation in the land. So Pharaoh now tells Moses that the people can go and sacrifice to God, but he says they must do so within the land, so stay within the borders of Egypt. There in verse 25, when Pharaoh summons Moses and Aaron to come back to him, go sacrifice to your God within the land, so stay within the land. But Moses declines the offer on the grounds that the Israelites would offer sacrifices which were abominable to the Egyptians. And then this would lead to perhaps to the people being stoned by the Egyptians. We see this sort of distinction between the Hebrews and the Egyptians earlier as well in the book of Genesis in chapter 43 and verse 32, that the Egyptians regarded the Hebrews as being abominable. In Genesis chapter 43, when Joseph's brothers come and invited to eat with him in his home, they are separated. They eat separately. So verse 32 says they served him, that's Joseph, by himself, and them, the brothers, by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians might not eat bread with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. And then later in chapter 46 and verse 34, when Jacob and the rest of the family arrive, chapter 46, verse 34. This is Joseph telling Jacob what he is to say to Pharaoh. When Pharaoh asks him, what is your occupation? You shall say, your servants have been keepers of cattle from our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers, in order that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. So the Egyptians regarded those who were shepherds as being an abomination. And so there may be some connection here when Moses says to Pharaoh that we'd rather not stay in the land, that these offerings would perhaps be an abomination to the Egyptians, that perhaps some of the animals that they would be sacrificing would be regarded as abominations, or certain animals would be regarded as being sacred to the Egyptians, and so to sacrifice them would perhaps be blasphemous. There is a story, an ancient story of the Persians winning a battle against the Egyptians because they drove a screen of sacred animals ahead of them, which the Egyptians refused to shoot at. and so the Persians then were able to win that battle. So Moses says, comes back with a counter offer. He says that they must go 3 days' journey into the wilderness to make their sacrifices. And then Pharaoh comes back again with another offer. So Pharaoh agrees to let the people go into the wilderness, but he says they are not to go very far away. So not the 3 day journey, but don't go very far. Nothing further is said about that offer. Moses' reaction to that isn't recorded. But then Pharaoh asks Moses to entreat God for him for relief from the plague of flies, just as he had done with the plague of frogs in chapter 8, verse 8. Entreat the Lord to take away the frogs from me and from my people. And again, the same here in verse 28 at the end of the verse, make entreaty for me. So asking Moses to ask God to bring him relief from the flies. So Moses leaves the presence of Pharaoh, then telling him, yes, he will pray to the Lord for the removal of the swarms of flies to happen tomorrow. But again, Moses warns Pharaoh not to deal forcefully again by not letting the people go. So don't go back on your word again. So Moses does as he says he would. He prays. In verse 30, Moses went out from Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord, and the Lord answered his prayer. The Lord did as Moses asked and removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his servants, from his people. Not one remained. So a complete removal of this problem. But again, when Pharaoh is relieved of the problem, he goes back on his word. And verse 32 says, but Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also and did not let the people go. And so we come to the fifth plague then, in chapter 9, verses 1 to 7. It says, then the Lord said to Moses, go into Pharaoh and say to him, thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, let my people go, that they may serve me. For if you refuse to let them go and still hold them, behold, the hand of the Lord will fall with a very severe plague upon your cattle, which are in the field, the horses, the asses, the camels, the herds, and the flocks. But the Lord will make a distinction between the cattle of Israel and the cattle of Egypt, so that nothing shall die of all that belongs to the people of Israel. And the Lord set a time, saying, tomorrow the Lord will do this thing in the land. And on the morrow the Lord did this thing. All the cattle of the Egyptians died, but of the cattle of the people of Israel not one died. And Pharaoh sent, and behold, not one of the cattle of the Israelites was dead. But the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he did not let the people go. So with Pharaoh's continual failure to allow the people to go, Moses is commanded again by God to go to Pharaoh and to repeat the demand to let the people go. This time Pharaoh is told that if he refuses to let the people go, then a very severe plague will fall upon the Egyptians' livestock. So the animals affected, listed there would be the cattle, horses, asses, camels, the herds, and the flocks. All will be affected. And this is really the first plague which will affect personal property. The previous plagues had caused much discomfort and irritation and pain, but this plague was destroying personal property. The word used for plague here indicates a pestilence and probably describes some sort of cattle plague. One suggestion is that it was anthrax, although that cannot be certain. But whatever this was, it was a highly infectious and fatal disease. However, again, a distinction will be drawn between the Egyptians and the Israelites. The livestock of the Egyptians will be affected, but not the livestock belonging to the Israelites. So none of the Israelites' livestock will die. Again, indicating God's control over this event. A cattle plague, pestilence might be a natural occurrence, but God is controlling this and controlling where it will be affected. And this is again seen further, God's control of this seen further in verse 5, with the Lord setting the time when the plague would strike. He says, tomorrow the Lord will do this thing in the land. So there's a time, the time is specified here as well. And so the plague takes place as it has been announced. And again, a plague such as this would have a devastating effect upon the economy of Egypt. And we might think of recent situations in our own country with foot and mouth disease and farmers having to kill their livestock because of that, or earlier the BSC or mad cow disease, when all of the cows had to be put down because of that, and the effect that has upon the farming industry in our own country when there's any outbreak of a disease like that. The statement here that all of the cattle of the Egyptians died is not to be taken absolutely, for in verse 19 we see that the Egyptians are told to take their cattle in from the fields for protection from the hail when that plague comes. So they still had some, not literally all of the cattle died, but all there referring to the large number of cattle that died. Verse 3 there refers to the plague coming upon the cattle which are in the field. So perhaps those that were in shelter, in sheds, perhaps would be spared from that plague. Pharaoh sent to confirm that none of the Israelites' cattle had died. In verse 7 there, we're told that sent someone to observe the Israelites, and yes, indeed, none of the Israelites' cattle had been affected by it. However, his heart remained hardened, and again he did not let the people go. The plague on the cattle had a particular religious significance for the Egyptians as well. In Egypt, bulls and cows were sacred animals. One special bull would be chosen as the sacred Apis bull, which was the sacred animal of the god Ptah, and it would be kept in a special enclosure near to the temple of Ptah, where it would be fed with delicacies, given special food. And this sacred bull was supposed to have certain distinguishing marks or characteristics which indicated its deity and identified it as an object of worship. In the 19th century, archaeologists discovered a series of 64 tombs in which sacred Apis bulls had been buried. Another deity associated with cattle was the goddess Hathor, who was the goddess of love, beauty, and joy, and she was represented by the figure of a cow. So this plague on the cattle then would be regarded as a judgment on all of the Egyptian gods that were represented as cows or as bulls. So it's another attack upon the Egyptians' gods here. And then the sixth plague in chapter 9, verses 8 to 12, the boils and sores. So chapter 9, verse 8 to 12 gives us the account here. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, take handfuls of ashes from the kiln, and let Moses throw them toward heaven in the sight of Pharaoh. And it shall become fine dust over all the land of Egypt, and become boils breaking out in sores on man and beast throughout all the land of Egypt. So they took ashes from the kiln and stood before Pharaoh, and Moses threw them toward heaven, and it became boils breaking out in sores on man and beast. And the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils were upon the magicians and upon all the Egyptians. But the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not listen to them, as the Lord had spoken to Moses. So as with the third plague, the plague of gnats, Pharaoh is given no warning concerning the coming of the sixth plague. The Lord tells Moses and Aaron to take ashes or soot from the kiln. Maybe the kilns that would be used in the making of the bricks, perhaps. And in the sight of Pharaoh, Moses is to throw the ashes, soot into the air toward heaven. So it's an act that is done to symbolize the spread of the disease that is to come with this plague. The ashes become fine dust, he says, over the land of Egypt, becoming boils, breaking out in sores on man and beast throughout all the land of Egypt. So it's affecting the body, the physical body. It's some sort of skin disease affecting the people and the animals. The Hebrew word used for boils here is the same word that was used to describe the condition affecting Job in Job chapter 2 and verse 7. In Job chapter 2 and verse 7, we are told there, so Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. We don't know particularly what condition it was, but some skin disease of some kind. Also, it's the same word that was used of the condition affecting King Hezekiah in 2 Kings chapter 20 and verse 7, that King Hezekiah became ill and he had some sores or boils, which mentioned 2 Kings 20 verse 7, told in the first verse of the chapter that he became sick and was at the point of death. And verse 7 says, Isaiah said, bring a cake of figs and let them take and lay it on the boil that he may recover. So Hezekiah recovers from that illness that he had there. Also, it's the same word used in the diagnosis of leprosy in Leviticus chapter 13, verses 18 to 20. It says, and when there is in the skin of one's body a boil that has healed, and in the place of the boil there comes a white swelling or a reddish white spot, then it shall be shown to the priest. And the priest shall make an examination, and if it appears deeper than the skin and its hair has turned white, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is the disease of leprosy is broken out in the boil. So again, boil there mentioned. And in Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 27, in the curses that God pronounces upon Israel if they will not obey his law, he mentions this here, Deuteronomy 28 verse 27, the Lord will smite you with the boils of Egypt and with the ulcers and the scurvy and the itch of which you cannot be healed. So it would affect the Israelites themselves if they are disobedient to God's law. And in the book of Revelation as well, chapter 16, verse 2, there's mention there of boils when the first bowl is poured out. So the first angel went and poured his bowl on the earth, and foul and evil sores came upon the men who bore the mark of the beast and worshipped its image. So some kind of unpleasant skin disease coming and affecting the people here in this plague. So all of the Egyptians were affected by this, but the magicians are specifically mentioned in verse 11 as being affected by these boils so that they could not stand before Moses. Perhaps they would be regarded as being unclean, and so wouldn't be able to come into his presence in that way. But again, Pharaoh's heart remains hardened despite all of this. In verse 12, but the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not listen to them, as the Lord had spoken to Moses. And it said here that it's the Lord who hardened Pharaoh's heart. This is the first time since chapter 4, verse 21, that it is said that the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. In chapter 4, verse 21, the Lord speaking to Moses told him that he would harden, I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. And then in between time, the previous plagues, it was said either that Pharaoh hardened his own heart or simply that his heart was hardened. And we looked at this in the previous lesson as well, as the idea of, is it the Lord who hardens his heart, or is it Pharaoh who hardens his own? Well, it's both, really. So the plague of boils and sores then may have demonstrated the powerlessness of the Egyptian gods who were associated with healing. They had gods who they appealed to for healing, and Serapis and Imhotep were two such gods associated with healing. And so it would show the ineffectiveness of those gods. And no doubt the Egyptians would have prayed or appealed to those gods for relief, but when none came, they would have been left in despair. So again, we see the increasing intensity of the plagues as they're taking place here, and how they follow on progressively from one to the other. But consistently throughout, Pharaoh's heart remains hardened, even when he makes his promises to let the people go or adds certain conditions. You can go, but don't go very far. His heart is still hardened, and that's going to remain the pattern throughout until we get to the 10th and the final plague. So it's this increasing conflict that is going on here between Pharaoh being stubborn and refusing to listen, refusing to learn the lessons of the plague, and God bringing these things upon him to try to teach him that lesson. A couple of questions we might want to think about here. The plagues show God's control over the creation and nature. How does this affect our view of natural disasters today and events such as climate change? What happens when people exchange the truth about God for a lie, and when they worship the creatures rather than the Creator? We're thinking there of Paul in Romans chapter 1, verses 20 to 25. Where he says, ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature, namely his eternal power and deity, has been clearly perceived in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their senseless minds were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man or birds or animals or reptiles. Therefore God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. That's really what the Egyptians had done, exchanging the truth about God for a lie and worshipping the creatures rather than the Creator. So we will stop there.